The Rational Male, Preventive Medicine, Chapter 8, Open Hypergamy. Controlling Interest. Quote, "When looking for a life partner, my advice to women is to date all of them, the bad boys, the cool guys, the commitment-phobic boys, the crazy boys, but do not marry them. The things that make the bad boys sexy do not make the good husbands. When it comes time to settle down, find someone who wants an equal partner, someone who thinks women should be smart, opinionated, and ambitious, someone who values fairness and expect, or even better, wants to be in share in the home. These men exist, and trust me, over time, nothing is sexier." Quote by Shari Sandberg Lynn in Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. Shelley Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, provides us with a unique illustration of prevailing feminine psychology that has been evolving since the sexual revolution. In this statement, she is briefly ignorant of her blatant admission of the reality of feminine hypergamy, but I felt her advice to women here represents so much more than just a display of her simplistic ignorance. For as long as I have butted heads with many obstinate deniers of hypergamy influences on women personally and society on a whole, I am not sure I have read more damning indictment of hypergamy from a more intentional woman. Sandberg's advice to the next generation of women essentially puts the lie to and exposes the uncomfortable truth of women's effort to deny the fundamental dynamic dualistic female sexual strategy, alpha facts and beta facts. Even if you want to argue the evolutionary psychology and the biological origins of women's pluralistic sexual strategy, the feminine imperative has progressed to the point that the fact is not socially evident. Women have come to the point where they are comfortable in openly admitting the truth that red pill awareness has been drawing attention to well over a decade now. Courtesy of Sherry Sandberg, the alpha fact beta fact basis of women's sexual pluralism is now publicly recognized. It's kind of ironic considering that what the monosphere has been trying to make men aware of in years now is being co-opted, embraced, and now owned as if women had always practiced an open sexual pluralism, incredulous of the man's shock over it. However, the truth is that a feminine-centric social order can no longer hide the increasingly obvious fallout and the consequences of societal restructure to accommodate women as the predominant sexual interest. Ironically, the best spokesman to illustrate the dichotomy between both sides of women's hypergamy should be Sherry Sandberg, the voice and the embodiment of several generations of women raised on the feminine imperative, unilaterally unrestrained hypergamy. So oblivious is the Sandberg to her feminine primary simplistic confirmation of hypergamy that it never occurs to her that men will be anything but accommodating to her life plan advice for a younger generation of women. It never occurs to her that a man who values fairness would ever reject her, much less despise her, for the duplicity that women's dualistic sexual strategy differentiates men of. So you see, it's not a red pill awakening that predisposes men to believing they are owned, entitled to, or deserving of sex, love, adoration, affection, or anything else from women. It is the generations of women like Sandberg who unabashedly exploit the old order conditioning of beta-backed men, while expecting them to dutifully accept their open or discreet coquetry with alpha-fax men, and then tell them that nothing sexier than their complacency innate with the wrinkle of their nose. Sandberg is ignorant of the feminine primary implication that her statements draw attention to, and I'm still on the opinion that an innate feminine sophilism motivates more and more women to their admission, but it is impossible to ignore the new degree of comfort in which women feel in laying bare in their dualistic sexual strategy. To some significant extent, the feminine imperative no longer needs to keep the good genes, good dad dichotomy ugliness a secret from men any longer. There is a new ambient sense of assured long-term security in the feminine mind that is predisposing women to prioritize the better genes, alpha facts, since side of predisposing women to prioritizing the best genes, alpha facts, side of the feminine hypergamy. Sandberg's advice is a vital confirmation of this. However, she tactfully acknowledges a window of opportunity during which women possess a better capacity to pursue their side of hypergamy. Quote, The things that make the bad boys sexy do not make them good for your husbands. When it comes to time to settle down, find someone who wants an equal partner. End of quote. In these two sentences, Sherry, and by extension the feminine imperative, essentially confirms the women's pluralistic sexual strategy. My sexual market value graph is depicting women peak sexual market value and decay, and the first half of the timeline of women's phase of maturity. Selling the better. With regards to men, I believe that the most salient part of Sandberg's admission is found at the end. These men exist, and trust me, over time, nothing is sexy. For the better half of the time since the sexual revolution, it was necessary for the feminine imperative to convince majority of men that their eventual better providership for women was not only their duty, but also a prime aspect of the feminine attraction. Under the pre-sexual revolution, older attraction model, this may has been the case at a large degree. However, after the revolution, and as women hypergamy prioritized towards good genes, alpha facts, short-term sexual partners, the good dad, better bucks, men needed an ever-increasing sale of their attractiveness by women. This assistant sale was a necessary element of ensuring future long-term security for women while pursuing increasingly more short-term breeding opportunities as feminine primacy expanded into society. The future good dads will never be patiently waiting for women in discretion years during their sexual market value peak. So they sell because an evolving definition of the woman found attractive in men based on that older model of dependability, patience and industriousness, and every other characteristic that defined a good provider. The following quote is from The Masculinity in Sex by David A. Frederick and Dr. Marty J. Hasselton. According to strategic pluralism theory, Ginstead and Simpson 2000, men have evolved to pursue reproductive strategies that are contingent of their value of the mating market. More attractive men accrue reproductive benefits from spending more time with seeking multiple mating partners and relatively less time investing in offspring. In contrast, the reproductive effort of less attractive men who do not have the same mating opportunity is better allocated to investing heavily in their mates and offspring and spending relatively less time seeking additional mates. From a woman's perspective, the ideal is to attract a partner who confers both long-term investment benefits and genetic benefits. Not all women, however, will be able to attract a long-term investing mate who also displays heritable fitness cues. Consequently, women face trade-offs in choosing mates because they may be forced to choose between males displaying fitness indicators or those who will assist in offspring care and be good long-term mates. Gangstad and Simpson 2000. The most straightforward prediction that follows is that women seeking short-term males, when the man's only contribution to offspring is genetic, should prefer masculinity more than women seeking long-term mates. Strategic pluralism theory is a functional definition of feminine hypergamy, but what this theory hadn't yet accounted for at the time it was published was the necessities of women in regards to the short-term mating strategies and long-term parental investment opportunities over the course of their various phases of maturity as they aged. The better investment sale was necessary because it ensured male parental investment at a later, usually epiphany phase, time in woman's life. Thus, Sandberg prays for men who think women should be smart, opinionated, and ambitious. Men who value fairness and expect, or even better, want to do this share in the home, will eventually be sexier than the alpha bad boys and the cool boys, the commitment-phobic boys, the crazy boys. She encourages women to have sex earlier in life is an excellent example of this sale. Ironically, it is exactly this sale that women encourage the very transactional value of sexual relations with men they are screening about recently. It's the corporate fallacy of the better scale. Do more around the house, play into the equalitarian schema women ache they need in a provider. Support her ambitiousness, the opinionatedness, and you'll be considered sexier and get her better sex she had been saving for guys like this. Building the better. The problem of feminine imperative lands into selling the better is that for women's independent expand, they sell because less necessary and less effective. Less necessary because women's personal, social and legal long-term security insurances have become almost entirely disconnected from men's direct, not indirect provisioning. Less effective because men have become increasingly aware of their disenfranchisement of the old order provisioning model as being something they might equitably be rewarded for in a woman's innate interest and the genetic sexual desire and the genuine sexual desire. As the consequences and repercussion of women's hypergamous priority shift to alpha facts becomes more evident and real for men, and their capacity and comfort with disconnecting and relating this shared expectation with other men becomes more widespread, the less effective the sale is for the better men awaiting their turn to enter into the pre- or post-war monogamy with the women attempting the sale. Throughout the 70s and 80s, and most of the 90s, the sale was effective because men were isolated socially and technologically from each other's relative experiences. From the late 90s onward, the isolation diminished while the societal results of feminine primacy have become more grimly and painfully evident to men. In this ever-reinventing fluidity, the feminine imperative found it necessary to transition from selling men to being later and later lifelong providers to women into building a generation of men who would expected themselves to fulfill the role when the time came. These men will be raised and conditioned to be efficient, better providers women would need once they had the following Saddleback model of hypergamy. This would be the boys and men who would be taught to naturally defer to the authority and correctness of women under the auspice of their desire to be an equal partner. These are the men raised privately and created socially to be ready for women when it comes time to settle down and find someone who wants an equal partner. These will be men ready to expect and accept a woman's proactive coquetry of him in the name of being a feminine equal. These are the men raised to accept socially exposed, the proudly open form of hypergamy in a place of selling it to the old order better provisioning model, the hypergamy schism. The problem this creates for women becomes one of dealing with the men they need to sell a secretive hypergamy to, and the men they build to accept an open form of hypergamy too. The increasing comfort with the open admission of hypergamy is relative to a woman's capacity to get away with it. A woman like Sherry Sandberg has the means of decisively ensure her future independence and long-term security, at least in the financial sense, whether she's married or not. She could very well return to the bad boys she found so arousing and advises women to date, but never rely on the direct provisioning. As such, she is very comfortable publicly revealing the ins and the outs of post-sexual revolution hypergamy without so much of an afterthought. While she publicly affirms the build model of better provisioning under the guise of equalism and expects those guys will be awaiting you, this doesn't hold true for the majority of women. Women with affluence enough or a physical attractiveness sufficient to virtually ensure their future provisioning are much more comfortable with the build a better model than women who find themselves more lacking in this assurance. The more necessitous a woman finds herself in the sexual marketplace, the more likely she is to deny the mechanism of her hypergamy. A woman less confident in consolidating on her future long-term security and or cooperative parental investment has a much more personal investment in keeping the ugly, the precious truth of hypergamy in a secret from men. A woman less confident in consolidating on her future long-term security and or cooperative parental investment has a much more personal investment in keeping the ugly, duplicious truth of hypergamy a secret from men. As such, this men will be more predisposed to misdirecting the men becoming more aware of this truth and relying more on selling models for better provisioning. Needless to say, this spread between women and comfortable in open hypergamy and women reliant upon secretive hypergamy is a point of conflict between the haves and the have-not women in the sexual marketplace. The more men become aware of the woman's hypergamy and strategic sexual pluralism through women open embrace for it in the monosphere, and more pressure have-not women will fail to also embrace the openness. Open hypergamy. It's gotten to a point now that the feminine imperative is comfortable in ridiculing men for not already being aware of the alpha beta bucks dynamic of hypergamy, as well as for going along with it anyway. The expectation that men should already know this dynamic and be ready to unconditionally accept it and commit themselves to it, eagerness, genuine shock when a man deviates from the script. In 2014, there was a popular serious story about the spreadsheet guy who logged his wife rejecting his sexual advances and have reasoning for doing so. After making this log public and having it go viral on the internet, the anger female commenters expressed over this logging of his wife's excuse for turning him down sexually was not due to his action, but rather than those actions represented the greater whole of men. Women's indignation over this was rooted in a surely better man not already being aware of the new role he is expected to play. The new order feminine groupthink presumed that any guy who follows the old order social sexy contract should already know that he has been cast as a dutiful providing better. He ought to follow the prepared script and plan for the guy who responsibly proves he is better man, for having forgiven her sexual indiscretion with prior alpha and accepting the role of being integrated to her emotional support and hand holder. And all of this is after she's been self-discovery, epiphany phase, and then knows who she really is. Jeans and bottles. This expectation of men being preconditioned to follow the feminine primary social order is not just limited to women's expectation. We have progressed to the point that blue pill men are themselves becoming vocal advocates of the same acceptance of open hypergamy. Under the dubious pretense of concern for the general lack of gallant chivalry and the better backside provisioning women are entitled to, these watered-down, purple pill dating coaches suffer from the same shocks and the indignation that a woman, somewhere, might not be given her lives due to having a dutiful better awaiting to fulfill the provisioning side of the sexual strategy when her sexual market value begins to decay in earnest. In a feminine-centric order, even men are required to be strong advocates of open hypergamy and ultimately their own proactive cuckoldry that a woman may be better prepared than most better men to provide for her own security is never an afterthought for them. Their self-speech is the same older lie, and women will reciprocate intimacy for the man's good nature and virtuous respect for the feminine if they all accept open hypergamy. But the spreadsheet guy went off the reservations. How dare he keep track of his wife's sexual frequency? The general anger is rooted in his not getting the prefabricated social convention that sex for consummate better providers just dips off after marriage. But if he would just man up and fall into a supportive and pre-established role and learn to be better, more attentive man for his wife, she would logically reciprocate with more sex. For what it's worth, the men women generally want to fuck wouldn't keep track of sexual frequency because a woman's dread of missing out on a sexual opportunity with a desired alpha is usually enough incentive to ensure frequency. Alpha men don't complain about sexual frequency, they simply move on to a new woman. Beta complain about sexual frequency because they were expected to know and accept, now in open hypergamy, that they will never enjoy the type of sex their women had with the alphas in their party years. Rather, they are led to believe they would get it, and better, if they accept their new role and commit to the woman provisioning. Nobody marries their best sex ever. According to the recent study by Ivy League, less than half of the wedded women married the person who was the best sex of their lives. 52% say that was an ex. In fact, 66% would rather read a book, watch a movie, or take a nap than sleep with a spouse. Another Chattel, a 33-year-old writer from the East Village, says, "With the men I have loved, the sex has been good, something great, but never best. It's resulted in many orgasms and as fun, but comparatively speaking, it didn't have the intensity that comes with the best sex. I knew my best sex partner was temporary, and so the great sex was the best because the sex was a relationship," she adds. "We didn't have to invest in anything else." As you can see here, the incremental problem that advocates of the man up and accept your duty to open hypergamy men will find that recoiling to the older social contract they need to balance hypergamy with will become increasingly more difficult as example after example with this become more evident and more commonplace. The dating coaches are hooking advice from the perspective of the older social contract for men in order to reconcile the well-earned, well-deserved consequences women are now suffering as a result of the new older feminine primary social contract that has embraced and mainstreamed hypergamy. Getting the best of her. The following was quoted from the popular advice column in 2014. It emphasizes my own. Dear Caroline, after multiple relationships not working out because both parties were dishonest in one or another, I decided to use a new approach to my current relationship. I am 23, met my current boyfriend, also 23, online, and decided to be completely honest. This was meant to mostly cover my feelings, and I tended to hold things in unhealthy, but I let it fall over all aspects, including the disclosure of my sexual history. I have now learned this was a mistake. Not to make any better guy even more depressed, but I read this and couldn't help but see how Sherry Sandberg open hypergamy model is only going to aggravate more and more unplugged red pill aware betters. Consider how disfranchised that beta is going to be when he is flat and told of his face by a woman he has conditioned to believe would appreciate his unique older order appeal, that he'll never be getting the sex best he delivered his wife would be waiting in him in marriage. It's open thing to read article detailing the triumphant aspects of new open hypergamy, but it is one thing to see it pretarily used in commercial advertising. But it's quite another to experience it firsthand, visually, in your face. Besides the fact that she had been in multiple relationships at age 23, I find it interesting that today's women recognizes this openness as a mistake. Not a mistake with regards to her own choices, but rather the mistake in feeling comfortable enough to lay her bare sexual strategy for a guy who expects would be already be accepting of who she is. In feminine primary society, men are constantly and publicly demonized or the manipulator sex. The default presumption is to assume men are ones to watch out for. Men are sex with the most dishonest nature, with the most to gain sexually by playing games to trick women into believing they are something they are not in order to fuck them and leave them. While it's giggly, this presumption is really generalized, meta-social convention that builds a foundation of more specific social convention women need in order to exercise a feminine primary control with men and culture on whole. It is actually a rudimentary convention that's easy to accept for women since feminine hypergamy has evolved a subconscious vetting mechanism into most women's sex. While it's deeply fun and entertaining for women to categorize men into cards and darts, the irony of their doing so is that this only highlights women's lifelong patterns of deception and manipulation efforts necessary to affecting their own dualistic sexual strategy. That sexual selection, somewhere, the one sheet that predisposes women on a limbic level of evaluating mating option of short-term breeding opportunities, alpha facts, with parental investment opportunities, beta bugs, is the same mechanism that made women the more deceptive sex when it comes to sexual strategies. The problem now is that this hypergamous deceptiveness is being replaced with complete honesty from a macro societal level down to the interpersonal one. Ironically, it will be the most stubborn of blue pill beta men advocating for a return to an older society contract who are destroyed by the very women they hope will respond to it, who will be the last to finally accept and respond to the new order of open hypergamy. End of chapter 8.